So hello everyone, welcome to this week's video. My name is Mike Ingledew. I'm all about making you successful with your integrated product support strategies, whether that's identifying the right software, specifications, standards, or just developing your skills around the world of integrated product support, predominantly looking at things like S1000D, S2000M, 6000T, those kind of things. Anyway, what we're going to talk about today is something that you guys have been asking me for a lot, and it's something that I've been reluctant to do, but I'm getting increasing questions around this, so I'm going to do it. And I'm going to look at the software tools that I use here at TDW. Now, of course, a lot of the questions I get are around specialist tools, S1000D, ATA, some of the ILS specs, etc. Those are the kind of general questions that I get, and I tend to try and avoid telling people the tools that I use, because the tools that I use may not necessarily be the tools that are appropriate or work for you and your project. However, we will, over the next few sessions, look at some of the tools that I use day to day, and we'll look at some of the more advanced tools that I use as well. But this week we're going to look at some of my day-to-day tools and what I use in terms of what's commercial off the shelf available, what's widely available, and I suspect also what many of you care about is what is affordable. So I guess, we can't beat free. And so I've got some, little pointers on here that are low cost, or, some that are free as well. So these are the tools that are kind of my go-to tools when I'm helping a client define a requirement, or if I'm doing something quick and dirty and producing a tutorial for a client, or I'm just sending them some information, helping them define something, helping them visualize something. These are my kind of go-to tools. So these are the ones that we're going to look at today. But a few of my disclaimers here. These are not sponsored links, and nor am I suggesting that you rush off and buy all of these tools, or you download all of these tools, because what works for me may not necessarily work for you. So, but I know that majority of these will offer you some free trials, so you can go and download them and have a play with them, and obviously subject to your IT department, etc., allowing you or permitting you to do so. I'm looking at the generic tools that I use day to day. So if I'm helping someone define a technical publications requirement, helping them define an S1000D SNS, helping them look at information codes, those kind of things around S1000D, or if I'm just helping them produce strategy documents, these are the tools that I'm talking about, not the heavy hitting stuff. I think I've already labored that point. So, and all logos or names that I mention are the respective ownership of their copyright or logo owners, or whoever owns them. I'm not making any claim to the ownership of any of these tools. I'm just sharing with you the tools that I use, so you can go make your own mind up. By the way, I've got a little dog on the floor next to me here, and he's snoring, and hopefully he's not going to disrupt us too much. So those are kind of my disclaimers, and I've kind of got the TDW bullet here. And this is where I'm looking at, on the outside, the day-to-day kind of the wider ranging tools that I use. Then I have some more advanced tools that I use, which I'll do in another video, which gives me another week of content. So I'll do some of the more advanced tools that I use for sure. And then I'll look at some of the specialist tools that are available to me in terms of S1000D, ATA, those kind of things that also I use. Now, off the bat, it's important to tell you some of the tools, the subscription services that I use, and I think I've done stuff on this in the past on the YouTube channel. So if you can't find it, let's give it a quick search. But there are some things that I use. I use the Adobe Technical Communication Suite, and now there are parts of that suite which are really good, and there are parts of that suite that I just don't use. Okay, but for me, it's more affordable. I think it's $50-$60 a month. I can have it on 2 machines, And there are, like I say, there's areas of that, what's available to me in there that I don't use, but there are areas in there that I use heavily. And it might surprise you which tools I'm talking about very, very shortly. And I also have Adobe Creative Cloud. This is kind of a good companion. There's a slight overlap between Creative Cloud and Technical Communication Suite. But what this does is it gives me access to a whole bunch of advanced tools. And if you're interested in 3D, AI, that kind of stuff, Creative Cloud is a great tool to have. That's probably my biggest go-to tool every day that I use here, or set of tools that I use here at TDW. I say it on all my training. I say it on all my consultancies. If you want to know where technical communication is going, or you want to know where technology is going in terms of content, subscribe to the Adobe newsletters and just keep an eye on what they're doing and where they're going in the creative sector, because generally what happens in the creative sector comes over into our industry as well, and our need for technical communication type stuff. Now, it's also important to note that I do run Windows and iOS. My go-to is a Mac Studio here. I love doing all my kind of graphic design. I love doing all of my presentation type stuff on the Mac Studio. Probably a bit of an overkill for what I need, but you know, Claire signed off on the funds, so I took it. But I also have MacBook Pros, I use iPad, and I also have a mobile device as well, which I'll just double check is switched off. So I do a lot of work on the go as well, because I spend a lot of time on the road. So I'm spending a lot of time, off seeing clients. And with me, I need to be able to take tools that predominantly work on iOS. But of course, we know that in our sector, the majority of tools are Windows based. So I do have a pretty powerful PC that's behind you right now, and on there I've got some specialist tools, etc. And I do occasionally do some graphic design and that kind of stuff on there. So when we are looking at the stuff that I am generally running here, I do have PC, I do have lots of iOS stuff. I'm not necessarily a fanboy. I just like the way that iOS works. I just like the way that I can navigate it really quickly. In general, tools just work. And there's not so much faff on when I'm faffing with things like Windows. However, there are things in the technical communication suite that will only work on Windows. So sometimes I just have to go to the Windows machine to do a tutorial. And, things like FrameMaker, for example. I know I've done a tutorial on how you can run those things on a Mac. But, it's not the most efficient way of working. So not a fanboy. And one of the trends that I'm seeing, and you guys can either agree or disagree or concur, is I'm seeing a increase in Android devices being banned from use on projects. So I do have Android devices, but they're predominantly used for my hobbies. So if I'm out and about doing some photo editing or something where I'm not, or on my motorbike, I have maps that sit on top of the Android device, on top of my tank bag, because they have GPS services installed on most of the tablets. So that's kind of my landscape. So we're going to move into kind of the day-to-day tools that I use. And again, please bear in mind all those caveats that I said. Don't rush off and buy this stuff. Decide whether it's for you. None of these are sponsored links. I get nothing from you downloading or contacting, or despite several software companies contacting me saying, could I do something for the channel on their tools, and they would then pay me a kickback, etc. Not where I really want the channel to go. I want this to try and remain as independent and neutral as possible. And so what are my day-to-day go-to tools? Now, I've broken this down into functions, and I will make this available as a PDF, so you can download the PDF from our website as well if you want to go and have a look at that. So I'm going to leave me off screen for now and just go through, I'm just going to talk you through my tools and what I use. So one of the biggest tools that I use is something called Evernote. Because of the way that I work and the way that my brain works in a creative way, I can have ideas at a random time. I can be out for dinner, I can be away on the motorbike or walking around the woods with my cameras, and I'll just have an idea. And I need a way to jot that down. And for me, Evernote is probably the biggest tool that I use. It works across all of my devices, syncs across all of my devices. I can tag content. I can easily find content when I'm back. So for example, this tutorial that I put together here, all of my initial ideas, all of my initial thoughts went into Evernote, and I'd use that on my mobile phone because they have widgets that you can just quickly bang down a load of ideas. And I can see a use case for Evernote in technical communication as well. But the reality is that my brain is constantly thinking, and I need to have a methodology for putting ideas down. I also use OneNote because that comes with Office 365, which we are also subscribers to here. So, and it comes to no surprise to you guys that I am a big fan of mind mapping software. And I use two. Why do I use two? Well, I use Mind Manager predominantly on my Windows machine. It works okay on the Macs. It's not brilliant on the Macs. It works okay. The power of the tool is most definitely in a Windows environment. However, the iOS tablet or the iPad support is not great. So I use Xmind if I'm on the train or I want to sketch out some ideas. I'm using Xmind for that. It has fantastic iPad support, which then I can sync with the desktop version, and then I generally move stuff over to Mind Manager, where I can then leverage the IPS toolkit, which we'll talk about in the next session of the tools that I use. And so those are kind of my note-taking, ideas logging. Anybody who's done a meeting with me, you will know that one of the first things that I open up on my machine, which is generally my MacBook Pro, I will load up Mind Manager, and that's where all of my notes go. And I have a structure that I follow. Everybody gets a file system on our Dropbox. I'll talk about Dropbox later, and I can easily come back to where my mind was at the time when I was in that meeting with the client. So for editing, I use clearly lots of us are still very much in Word and Excel. It seems that, these tools are kind of the power horses. Most people want to work in Excel. Most people want to have Microsoft Word documents. I'm writing a paper at the moment, and we're agreeing the content in Microsoft Word, but it will end up in a different tool. It won't be published from Microsoft Word. It's kind of the tool that everybody has access to, and everybody can open and use. So clearly we have Microsoft Excel. Adobe InDesign I have as part of my subscriptions with the Adobe Cloud stuff, and so I use that when I'm doing more fancy dancy kind of papers. This is where that Word document will end up. It will end up going into InDesign. I do have some plugins that I put on top of InDesign, which allows me to add interactivity and capability. And I also have Adobe FrameMaker. Now, Adobe FrameMaker, particularly on the Windows machine, it's not something I use day to day. It's a tool that if a client sends me a question and they're using FrameMaker and they want a question answering around S1000D, etc., I can fire it up and the guys at Mekon are giving me a license of Mekon Eclipse. I know you're not Mekon anymore, but and I can quickly do a tutorial for a client and send it over to them. So when I'm coming into more of the structured type stuff, I have XML Spy, which is quite an expensive tool, but I use that when I'm training off-site with clients, and we might load up XML Spy to look at some structures. Oxygen, the guys at Oxygen give me an NFR license, which is not for retail or resale license that I use a lot on training. And a great tool, Notepad++ with XML plugins. Now, I've done tutorials before on this on the channel, where you can get some really, it's a great free tool. And I know that some of my defense clients, Notepad++ is allowed on the network. So you can go and you can add in all of these add-ins, and you can get really functional tools that you can use. I mean, they're free, so you can't beat free. Part of some of my Adobe subscriptions, I also have Adobe Dreamweaver. That's a legacy thing. In my old days of being able to do web design, when I was a young buck, I used to do a lot of HTML stuff, and I use Dreamweaver a lot. So in the editing side, my day-to-day editing tools, those are kind of my go-to tools, and it depends what the client's asking for, it depends what the client's using, and it depends how quickly I can load up a tool as well. So I will if I'm on the train and a client email comes in, I can load up Oxygen really quickly on my MacBook and have a look at some XML structures for them. So what about supporting imagery? Probably the biggest tool that I use is a tool called Snagit from TechSmith. Now, they have offered me an affiliate link, so that but I've not set it up. And it's because it's such a low cost piece of software. I mean, I think it's about $30-50 maybe, I don't know, but you can do some really engaging screen grabs, and you can add annotations to them and draw call outs around them and put steps in place. And so from putting together a really quick and dirty step-by-step guide for a customer, I can just go open up Snagit, and it taps into my keyboard shortcuts. So if I do a screen grab, Snagit will work. So that's a great tool, and I've used Snagit for years, and I love it. Inkscape is another tool that is free, that you can download, and I got introduced to Inkscape for some training I was doing for NATO. And one thing I love doing about training is you guys share with me the tools that you use, and I generally go and download and have a play, and if it's not too expensive, I may end up buying it as well. So there are lots of great tools, and Inkscape was one of those that the NATO guys introduced me to. I wasn't sure whether to put Illustrator here or in the more advanced tools, because Illustrator is a tool that I use day to day. All of the fancy kind of TDW imagery is basically done in Adobe Illustrator, and of course Adobe Photoshop as well. If I'm out taking pictures of aircraft or armored vehicles or whatever, in general I will bring them into Photoshop via something called Lightroom, which is kind of more specific to photography. But I will do end edits in Photoshop, so that anybody who's done my training, that we have lots of pretty images that support what we do, and that's kind of the channel that they go in. So Illustrator for me is a tool it's a massive tool. It's and it does probably out of what it does from 100%, I'm probably using about 30-40% of the tool's capability. I know it does way more than what I'm probably using it for, and I'm always learning these tools as well, so I'm always learning how to do new things. And the problem is, of course, is that when you go from one tool to another, they use different terminology for the same function, which gets a little bit brain frying. I do a lot of videoing, and so this is my kind of quick and dirty video stuff. Is I use TechSmith Camtasia, and Camtasia is great if you're just doing screen grabs, screen recording, and then you want to do some voiceovers on that and you send that to your customer. I know some of you are using Camtasia to do proper tutorials for your clients. I use it pretty much for quick and dirty. I have some more advanced tools that I use for video editing, video capture. All of the tools that are around me here are kind of geared towards that more. I like to try and give something that's a little bit more of a pro feel when I'm doing tutorials. So, but Camtasia is great, and I use it across all of my devices, and it works exceptionally well. I do use Adobe Animate when I'm doing something that I maybe want to, put something a little bit more engaging in some of the training material. I can do an animation and export it and then import it into my training packs, which works well. But I do use some advanced tools. Adobe After Effects we'll talk about maybe in the next tutorial. So those are kind of my video recording, animation type tools that I do. Now I know that you can also do animation with Snagit, so you can create an animated GIF as well. We've done some of that on some of our online embedded support portal type stuff, which I'll talk about here very shortly. So, these tools are, like I say, my day-to-day. These are the tools that I go to. Of course, then I have to share stuff with my clients and my customers. And my biggest kind of quickest tool that I use is something called Dropbox. I have a fairly large account with those, a couple of terabytes online. I can create secure sharing folders, and my clients can go and download any of the documents that I might have put together for them, any animations I've put together for them, videos, etc. If a client wants me to use their secure FTP sites, I will use a tool called FileZilla, which works across both of my devices, both on Windows, because some clients I can only use Windows. And now, if I'm doing a product structure or showing a client what I think their product breakdown should be, I use Mind Manager. And one thing that Mind Manager is very good at is I can securely share a map with a client, give them a passcode, and they can log into that map and see all of the structures that I've put together for them, and they can then send me comments, and I can then change the map for them. So that's where, for me, the power of Mind Manager is. I can publish it as HTML5 online, either locally myself, or I can use the Mind Manager publishing server, which is what I generally do, and I send that out to the client. Now, I don't use any of the Camtasia kind of video review software. I know that they have that. I've tested it. I like it. I just don't think it's necessary for what I do. Of course, Adobe Acrobat Pro is one of the biggest tools that I use. And because, creating PDFs or being sent PDFs is the norm for most of us now. And I've put Adobe Robo Help here as well. Anybody who's done my training, that we have an interactive portal, and then if we're doing things like an S1000D authoring course, I put lots of exercises into Adobe Robo Help. We publish that as HTML5 online, and then we work through it together as an interactive portal. And why does that work really well? It's dead easy to use, by the way, and I've done a tutorial on how you can use things like RoboHelp to achieve the same kind of outcomes as what you can with S1000D in a much more cost-effective way. That's on our website. You can go watch that. And but that is a great tool that I like. Now, some of you are using things like Madcap Flare. I've tried Madcap Flare in the past. There were some functions in there that were not available, that were available in Adobe RoboHelp. And the fact that Adobe have made RoboHelp now work on Windows and on the Mac. I can work on this one on my MacBook Pro when I'm on the road, and I can come back in and do some more work on the Windows machine, etc. So gives me greater flexibility. And actually, the RoboHelp platform on a Mac or a piece of software on a Mac is exceptionally good. And I know that, you know, a lot of you out there who are producing software tools for the specialist markets are using things like RoboHelp to create your user guides, your training guides. I know one of you is using Madcap Flare as well. So those are my tools. I'll make this available as a PDF from our website. But what I would really like to know is the tools that you use. What are the tools that you use on your day-to-day kind of definition, product, creation and sharing ideas, or anything along those lines with your clients, with your project stakeholders, with anybody on your project. So I hope you found that useful. I hope you found it interesting. I do have a whole raft of other tools that I use which are slightly more advanced, which I'll do a follow-up to this on, which is looking at how I do maybe a little bit more of the animation stuff, the video stuff. And some of you spotted my loop deck on my desk behind me, and I got some questions about that. I'm going to share with you how I speed up my authoring processes with things like Stream Deck, Loop Deck, and another great little tool that is super cheap that you can buy, and you can really speed up your authoring processes. So I'm going to do a tutorial on that for you as well, and show you how I work with all of those things and how you can really ramp up your throughput. So let me know if you liked that, if you enjoyed that, if it's something that is interesting to you. Quite a long one this week, but hopefully you found it useful and interesting. I'm Mike Ingledew. Hit me up on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. Do share, do like, do subscribe. And if you give it a thumbs up, then I know that it's the kind of stuff that you want to see on the channel. Take care, and speak to you on the next one.